Welcome to you. If you're watching and listening live during this webinar, or if you're watching and listening to it at a later date. This webinar is one of a series put on by Industrial Christian Fellowship and in combination with Reading at Work. And it's designed to highlight the role of faith in the workplace and how that can be particularly strengthened through a book which Phil Jump, our main speaker, is going to be detailing. You'll also be watching 4 videos which are taken from prayers in the book. So we welcome you to this time. My name is Anthony Harrop, and I'm a retired person, but many years, of course, in the workplace, and with a great interest in how Christians live out their faith in the world of work. And a special welcome to Phil Jump, who has had a lifetime both in industry and now in the Baptist ministry in the northwest of England. Phil is going to be talking about the book that he and John Weaver wrote, which has just been published in July of this year. And I'm going to set the stage by talking about the reason for its being written and giving you some background as to what the Industrial Christian Fellowship is. 2021 is a very important year for us because it's the centenary of the founding of this work that has been effective for over 100 years. It started out in the middle of the 19th century with a mission to one of the most neglected sectors of British society, the so-called navigators, or shortened form navvies. These were the people who built the canals and railways of this country, the infrastructure that all the industry and indeed the agriculture depended on. And most of them were recruited from Ireland. They were laborers who came across. They came often with their families. They lived a very tough life. They were in many ways segregated from the general community. They were often looked down upon. They existed in one place for so long as the canal or the railway was built, and then they moved on to another place. Education was very low. And yet from the middle of the 19th century, there were a series of mission activities which aimed to provide health and education and change the lives of these navvies for the better. So those were putting people at the most disadvantaged sectors of society. But ICF came about through a fusion of that stream catering to the most disadvantaged with some who came from the most privileged. People like R.H. Tawney, the economist, William Beveridge, the civil servant tasked with founding the welfare state, and William Temple, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had a huge role, first of all, as Bishop of Manchester in social action in that city. So these two fused 100 years ago, and it brought a great movement among Christian churches of all shapes and sizes, all varieties, to work together for the common good and to get heavily involved in the uplift of the whole workplace. It included those who were some of the most disadvantaged and some of the most privileged. And it had a great impact on interwar Britain. I'm going to ask Phil now to expand on the significance of this year, and not only this centenary, but 2 books which have appeared. The book that Phil will talk about, which is Love Work, but also the book published last year, Love at Work, which is the centennial history of the Industrial Christian Fellowship. So Phil, over to you. Tell us about the significance of this year and why it is that these 2 books have been published at this particular time.
Well, thank you, Anthony. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to share in this evening. As you said, 2021 was a significant year because it was the centenary, or at least we thought it was a centenary of ICF. And interestingly, when we began to look in our records, we couldn't quite work out whether 2020 or 2021 was the centenary. And the reason for that is because, as you have just pointed out, ICF came about from the fusion of two organizations, and actually the Navi mission changed its name in 2020 to become ICF, and then it joined with the Christian Social Union in 2021. So that's why we were a bit confused. But what we recognized was that there was 100 years of history. And one of the things I would say about ICF is I think to some degrees it's a victim of its own success. Over the years, it's spawned some really quite significant pieces of work that have gone on to have a life of their own. And as a consequence, the organization itself perhaps hasn't become as high profile as some of the organizations, including the Labour Party. Many of the original members of the Labour Party were also members of ICF. And interestingly, the cover of the book that you've just shown, Love at Work, that photograph was actually taken not very far away from where I live. In fact, it's right. Thank you. That's it. He is called the Wholesale Navi. And this is a piece of public art that was commissioned on North Merseyside about 10, 15 years ago, which marks the spot, apparently, where the first earth was cut to build the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. And you can see from the piece of art that he literally breaks out of the ground. And in many respects, that's what we wanted to do with the book. We wanted ICF's story to break out of the ground, so to speak. So we wanted to mark this centenary. But it's interesting too, and I think you've picked this up, Anthony, in your introduction. You know, you were talking about the Navi mission. You were talking about a group of people who were on the margins. You're talking about those who kind of set aside Christian tradition in order to create a narrative that is relevant to those particular people. And of course, in today's world, we would call that pioneering. And there are a lot of very good fresh expressions and pieces of pioneer ministry going on around the UK and around the world. And so again, part of the reason we wanted to write the book was to say, you know, people have been here before. And we tried to write, although we've written the book sort of historically and sort of taken each sort of season of history, so to speak, we've also tried to draw out a key missional theme around pioneering, around evangelism, around sustaining organizations, around social justice, to kind of say, look, as we engage in mission in the 21st century, let's learn from those who have engaged in the past so that we don't go on relearning lessons that we could save ourselves the pain of learning. So we said from the outset, we wanted the history book to be a book about mission, a book that a contemporary mission practitioner could actually pick up and learn from, although it narrates history. So that's a bit about it. And I think the other thing I would say, I don't think we even realized this when we planned it, but as we researched the history of ICF, it became very clear that there were two significant moments in its history. The first is, again, the one you've spoken of in 1921, when, of course, the other big thing that was happening was that Europe was recovering from the First World War, and huge questions were being asked about the nature of British society. Colonialism was pretty much already in full decline at that point. Many people were coming back from the colonies with huge experience of kind of setting up government from scratch. And ICF was in there in some really high-level conversations about how British society needed to be reordered. And then again, at the end of the Second World War, you have William Temple calling together what's called the Malvern Conference. And one of the, again, a very similar thing, bringing different strands of society together to ask questions about what kind of world we should be building. And what's interesting is I actually read the report of the Malvern Conference about 8-9 years ago. And then if you remember, there was kind of major economic sort of meltdown in Europe and all kinds of things going on. Environmental catastrophe was raising its head. And if you actually read the Malvern Conference notes, you hear Temple saying, if we don't do A, B, and C, in 50 years' time, this will be happening. And there we were 50 years later experiencing those things. And so this was the other thing, because I think most of us would recognize, particularly now with the advent of COVID and post-Brexit, we are at another one of those crossroads in British society. And so again, I think there is that question of what is the role of the people of God? What is the role of the church in the conversations we now need to have about the kind of world that we live in? So that's kind of why that particular history is significant. And that in turn led on to a book of prayers that I think we'll talk about a bit more as our evening progresses.
Okay, thank you.
The famous phrase, "You're muted, Anthony."
Great. Thanks, Phil. That's very interesting. We get to understand the legacy of the Industrial Christian Fellowship and why it's been so significant, especially in the interwar years, but also in asking questions that need to be asked right up to the present day. I think it'd be good if we got a taste of what the Love Work book is about, because that's what we're going to be speaking about most this evening. And I thought it would be good, first of all, just to play us a video of something taken from the first of the 10 Commandments of this Reflections and Prayers for a World at Work. That'll just give us a taste of what the book is about and lead on to further questions, and further that you will, Phil, that you'll be able to enlarge on. So, Dave, can you play us that?
Accept this day as a gift from God. The sun may rise as predicted, our routines may be well rehearsed and established, but do not take this day for granted. For each successive dawn is a further sign of God's constancy and faithfulness. Receive this day as a child of God, defined not by its schedules, but the one who made it. Reclaim your identity as one who is called and commissioned to seek and pursue the ways of God's kingdom. Offer its waking hours as your sacrifice of worship and praise, as your call to willing service of the one who, knowing that all power was his to claim, diligently stooped to wash the feet of his companions. Embrace the routine and mundane. Acknowledge the disturbing and difficult. Accept the challenging and testing. Appreciate the interesting and fulfilling. And do not make the mistake of believing that any earthly experience can separate you from the love of God. Do not despise any task or responsibility that the day's routines bring. For God is present in all things. All things work together and interact, and those who love God are called to see good within them.
Thanks for that. That's very moving, and the graphics along with it give it an impact. Phil, I appreciate that. Run us through what Love Work is about. It's on the back cover. It talks about the 10 Commandments. What are these 10 Commandments? How did you come up with them? And how do you feel that they're applicable and needed in the workplace today?
I have made the same mistake. Sorry about that. Thanks for that, Anthony. what I think you pointed out earlier on that ICF came about through the fusion of, at one level, a relatively high level academic group of people asking big social questions, the Christian Social Union, and the Navi mission, which was very much about working with ordinary people in very ordinary contexts. And I think over the years, we'd recognized that we'd pretty well continued that tradition of asking big questions, asking quite deep questions. Interestingly, as I was preparing for today, I was reflecting on the fact that a few years ago, we had an ICF lecture where a very off-the-wall Baptist minister presented a vision for an alternative currency. And I think most of us kind of thought, well, that's a really nice idea, but it'll never come off. And of course, here we are now in the world of Bitcoin. And ICF has often been ahead of the curve, actually, in terms of its thinking. But what we recognized was that perhaps what we weren't doing was sort of getting that message across to your average person, if you like, on their average working day. How does this belief that faith and work belong together, how does that get lived out on a Monday morning when you're in a rush and you're trying to get to work and such like? And so we wanted to try and find a way that we could offer people a very simple way, or a very practical way of thinking about what it meant to be a Christian at work. And so we asked a couple of faith at work groups that we support to just go away and say, well, what is it that sort of marks you out as a Christian? Not sort of giving out tracts at lunchtime or sort of holding revival rallies at the office door or the workshop gates, but in terms of just working, what is it that marks you out as a Christian? And gradually these 10 commandments kind of distilled from those conversations. And if I'm honest, the other thing is that we were trying to find a way that we could just gently remind Christians to sort of hold on to their faith in the workplace. And so we came up with the idea that it'd be great if we could produce a drink mat that you could put your coffee mug on. And we came up with the idea of the drink mat before we came up with the idea of what you might put on it. So there he goes. That he's very well armed with all the visual aids today. And so actually part of it was we've got a great message to put on the drink mats. Now, at the same time, we'd also, over the years, been writing quite a lot of prayers and liturgies. And again, part of the logic for that is to say that partly, yes, if you're going to live out your faith in the workplace, it is tough, it is difficult, it is challenging. So let's give people perhaps the words to pray when they're at their wits' end, but also trying to influence public worship. And say, if we're going to get this message across, if people are going to be inspired and envisioned to live out their faith from Monday to Friday, how can we offer resources that could be used in local congregations? And over the years, these resources have just kind of grown and grown and grown. And a couple of people, including Dave Law, who is one of the movers and shapers of Reading at Work, was particularly keen that we should try and publish them in a book. And if I'm honest, I was not the most enthusiastic about this, because we'd just kind of written the centenary history. We'd got this Love Work 10 Commandments initiative moving. We've got another resource called Faith, Work and Christian Discipleship. I don't know whether you got that one ready to hand as well, Anthony, but we'd also put that out. And I was kind of thinking, the last thing we need is yet another separate initiative. Because you can't do too many things at once. And then it suddenly struck us in the midst of those conversations that actually these prayers would fit quite well into those 10 commandments. And so we began to curate them and to anthologize them under those headings. And then inevitably a few more got written, because as you looked at them and as you thought about, well, what do these commandments mean? And we kind of tried to write a little practical narrative. It kind of grew from there. So what we've tried to do is actually, it's not the kind of book you're going to pick up and read from cover to cover, in all honesty. It's more a kind of resource to have in your top drawer at work. And when you're having a bad day, maybe just pull it out and open and read one of them, or when you've just got a bit of spare time, or maybe at the beginning of the day. And I think the one that you've just played, Diligent, we try at the end of each section, just to give you a sort of format of the book. We present the commandment. We've then done a little bit of a biblical reflection, which you could potentially use in a study group if you wanted to. And then we've tried to sort of offer this reflective sort of summary, if you like, that you might just want to read in the morning and follow up. And I would say as well that the other thing we've done is we've set up a Twitter account called Love Work. And every single day we are trying to send out a tweet of one sentence from the book. So if you don't want to buy it, if you can wait patiently for about 15 years, you can actually get the entire book tweeted to you in one sentence tweets. But we would recommend that you buy it anyway. But that again is just trying to be that nudge to sort of say to people, don't forget to put Jesus at the center before you go into work. So that's kind of how it came about. It was really trying to collect those together and put them in a format that somebody could maybe, put in their bag or put in their desk drawer or put under their bench in the workshop and just use from time to time. And it kind of grew from there.
Thanks, Phil. That's helpful. I'm going to read out the 10 Commandments because I think you've whetted our appetites, and just to give those 10. The first is be diligent. The second, be alert, be forgiving, be caring, be honest, be healthy, be prayerful, be generous, be positive, and finally, be reliable. Well, I was struck by the first one, be diligent. I looked up on Wikipedia, Max Weber, the German economist and sociologist of the early part of the 20th century. And because he was the one who wrote a lot about Protestant work ethic and the origins of capitalism and so on. And I'm interested why be diligent is the first of the 10 Commandments, because some might look at that and say, this is just, we want some sort of Calvinist Protestantism here, be a good worker so the boss is happy and maybe one day you too will be a boss. So slightly negative on that, but I'm sure you've got a good reason why be diligent is the first of the 10 Commandments.
It's quite interesting you say that, Anthony, because I come from a sort of what you would probably call Protestant evangelical tradition. And I think one of the things that I've actually found quite inspiring is to kind of be drawn towards the Catholic work ethic rather than the Protestant work ethic. And actually, I think a lot of ICF's vision, and in fact, a lot of the prayers, I would say, come out of more of that. But I hear what you say. And I think I would want to say that there is a difference between being diligent and being overworked. But where it comes from is this, a lot of people talk about, sharing our faith, needing to be those who make Jesus known in the workplace. And the point that we really wanted to make is, look, if you're going to be taken seriously in any way, shape or form as a Christian believer, if you're going to be taken seriously, if you even begin to suggest that the Christian faith has something to say to the workplace in which you're involved, then actually, if you yourself haven't got a reputation for being there for people and being reliable, if you're the kind of person in the office that's forever letting people down or is forever turning up late or whatever, you're actually not giving yourself a platform from which to then offer some of the perspectives that we share. And so that's kind of where that came from. It wasn't necessarily saying, slavishly follow the Protestant work ethic, but it was saying, sometimes, and if I'm honest, I've kind of experienced this in my own experience of work before I went into the ministry, where, you had people who were very, very overtly Christian, dare I say, but weren't terribly popular because actually they weren't very reliable and they were sort of not really pulling their weight in the place. And so people actually were quite negative. And the point that we make actually in the preamble to that one is, if you are an ambassador for Christ and you don't take your job seriously, then people will assume that Jesus doesn't take your job seriously. If you don't take others seriously, I think that would be the thing for me. It is being diligent out of an act of concern and care for those you work with. I'm part of a brilliant workplace team. I know that I work for the church and I work in sort of what would be called Christian ministry, but I'm also, at the end of the day, we are a local employer and we are a business or a charity. And I'm delighted to be part of a really brilliant team. But part of the reason people get on, part of the reason people work well together is because everybody pulls their weight. Everybody covers each other's back. Everybody looks out for one another. I sort of say, try and be that person in your workplace. Try and be the one person in the workplace that everybody wants on their team. So no, it's not about slavishly working ourselves, and it's certainly not about economics. It's not about saying, let's make as much profit as possible so we can spend it all on building big churches and stuff, which I think was part of the Protestant work ethic in its original day. But it's just saying, for the sake of those you work with, be the one that everyone says, yeah, they're, to use the biblical phrase, they're the salt of the earth in our workplace.
Phil, that's great. And it actually leads on to the next of the videos we're going to watch, which is about people. And maybe that puts a human face on the being diligent, being alert, being forgiving. So let's watch that people segment.
Open my eyes, Lord, and open my heart, not only to see the needs and concerns of those around me, but to recognize those narratives that so easily numb my senses. The competitor, who then must bear the cost of my success, the customer whose needs are reduced to the wares that I offer, the manager whose status obscures their full humanity, the service provider we judge only by what they deliver. Stir me, I pray, from simply being content with the shrug of a shoulder because that's just how things are, measures of success that justify what might otherwise be questioned, echo chambers of routine that teach us to assume there's no other way, targets of achievement that draw our eyes away from the price of their attainment. So help me to be a true seeker of your kingdom, with tenacity and wisdom to see all there is to see, and the compassion to respond to all that my work reveals.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Phil, I'm going to read just a couple of the prayers that I found especially moving. One of them is from the Be Diligent section. Both of these have an origin in Scripture, and I thought that they show us how Scripture is not just something which we read and focus on something that happened several hundred or 1,000 years ago, but is really apposite, is really meaningful for us in the present day. And after I've read these two, maybe you'd like to comment some more about the creativity, the creation of the book, and where the prayers come from, and how anything more than you'd like to say in response to these two particular ones, but any others that very much stand out for you. So this one in the Be Diligent section is based on Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 to 11, the temptation of Jesus. And the title here is Temptations of Jesus Remind Us that the way of the cross is not always the easy choice. And this is the prayer. In the heat and emptiness of the desert wilderness, you saw the chance to fulfill your every need and desire, to satisfy and feed the expectations of those who hungered for what you might offer. Yet you chose to leave the stones unchanged. You saw the opportunity to grab the attention of every crowd, to show yourself as indestructible, falling from your heights only for the sake of proving your prestige. But you chose to leave the showmanship for others to parade. The fruits of every empire were laid at your feet, and the levers of power placed alluringly within your grasp. Given the chance to scale every height of human achievement, you refuse to worship the undeserving gods of this world. So as I take the mantle of my life's responsibilities, may struggle and adversity never become the excuse to abandon your way. May I not be lured by the wilderness narratives of easy success, but imitate your unfaltering example as I take up my cross and follow. Amen. Before I read the next one, Phil, is there anything there in this present reflection and prayer, the idea of thinking through the temptations of Jesus and what he refused to do? What is it that you would draw from that in terms of our attitude to the workplace and what we actually do in the world of work?
Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly, that particular prayer sort of began life actually in a sermon to ministers and to church leaders, because it did strike me that very often they are the three things that church leaders are very often tempted to do. Dare I say, solve everybody's problems, turn stones into bread, and keep everybody entertained, leap off the towers and keep them happy, and make us successful, and join in with the sort of narratives of the world around us. And so it began as a kind of conversation with church leaders to say, look, let's recognize the temptation. We talk about temptation as chocolate and ice cream and such like, but actually, there was no chocolate and ice cream involved in the temptations of Jesus. But actually, as I then began to think about it in the broader context of people's working lives, it did strike me that actually, dare I say, even particularly in the political field, this is very much the narrative that we expect. We want all our problems solved, we want to be entertained, and we want power. And an awful lot of life in the workplace, and an awful lot of the kind of, dare I say, the conveyor belt of consumerism is based around that. And so it was an attempt really to bring that to land, so to speak, in the world of work, and again to kind of try and help maybe those particularly with responsibility to just stop. And I've seen so many people burn themselves out, both in what we might call Christian ministry, but also in management. When I was a trade union rep, trade union secretary, I very often would be supporting managers who were finding things tough. And so often it was those three issues that were really the struggle. It was people's expectation that you could solve every problem, people's desperate desire that everything should kind of be what they wanted, and issues of power. So it was trying to say to people, you can either burn yourself out doing those things, or you can hear the message of Jesus. And I think that, this is one of the things that really kind of animates me. As you can see, I'm even getting animated as I'm saying it. Because I actually think so much of the teaching of Jesus has incredibly deep practical relevance to the world at work. One of the great parables that I love is the parable of the fig tree. And the sort of story that there's the fig tree and it's not bearing fruit, and the economist comes along, the manager who measures everything by its economic success. Look, we've got to rip this up, we've got to get rid of it because it's not bearing fruit. And the gardener comes along and says, look, give me a year, let me just dig around, let me just root out the foundations, let me get some air, and let's see it grow. And the number of times I've talked in secular contexts and used that parable, and managers have come to me afterwards and said, you blew my mind. We never realized that a biblical, you've just hit the nail on the head of how we do things and how we shouldn't do things. And I just think that's one of many examples. So yeah, I use that particular narrative from the temptations because I think those are temptations not only that many Christians face, but many managers, many leaders face in more general society. And as I say, I've seen the victims of trying to live up to those kind of expectations.
Thanks, Phil. It just shows us how relevant Scripture can be. And
yeah, absolutely.
Issues of church leaders, people who are in what we would call full-time Christian ministry. And certainly during COVID, I think there's been a heavy toll on many pastors and ministers and vicars. And some of them have just felt they can't bear the strain. And maybe those particularly with a strong pastoral ministry, and not being able to meet members of their congregation has caused them a lot of grief. I've certainly heard of at least a couple of examples where people have just quitted the ministry because of the way that COVID has blindsided them. And I think that's helpful to realize that everyone is part of the world of work. There's no such thing as being so holy that you can't be part of the world of work, and needing the same reflections and prayers in our own lives, whether we're whatever aspect of God's work we're in. And I'm including that God's work meaning the so-called secular work, because all of work is done under the eyes and with the help of the living God.
I mean, you really are winding me up there, Anthony, because I mean, I will always come back at you and say there's no such thing as secular work, as the earth is. But I think you're right. And I mean, one of the chapters in the book is be caring, and I think that's something that I am shouting very loud at the moment. It's interesting that the Liverpool City Council are all over the place at the moment. Are posters saying, be kind, be gentle, be patient. And I'm thinking, my word, that's 3 of the fruits of the Spirit that are being promoted. But I think again, it's, you're picking up the reality for say someone in Christian ministry or in church leadership. But it's the same. I mean, a simple example for me, I've been working online now for 18 months. If I'm taking a service, once upon a time, I would send the Bible reading, and somebody would either read it on the day or I'd read it on the day. Now I have to record the Bible reading. I probably make a mistake in the middle, so I have to record it again, or I get the volume wrong, so I need to record it again. I then need to load it into the PowerPoint. I then need to get all the verses, and then I realize I've read a bit wrong, so I then have to decide whether to change the text of the Bible or whether to go and record it again. Then I have to time it, and I have to turn it into a video. And so a job that took me 30 seconds suddenly takes me an hour. And I think that's true for school teachers. I think it's true for so many in our society at the moment. And again, just a simple, it really came home to me. My mum is in a care home. And so for 18 months, I wasn't able to see her during the COVID pandemic. Eventually, there was 1 visitor allowed, and then when we got to 2, I got to 2 because my brother's retired, so figured he had more time. And so I visited her for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and I put all this PPE on, the visor and there's a kind of big foam band around your head. You're covered in plastic, and I was so hot and uncomfortable. Struggling to breathe, didn't know whether to put my glasses on or take them off because the visor was steaming up. And I'm thinking there are people who are having to work with this gear on for 8 hours a day and having to work, not sit next to their mother watching YouTube. And again, I really think this be caring narrative is one we need to get out there at the moment, because I do fear that society is becoming impatient again, and some of those old habits that we did seem to manage to suppress during COVID are coming back. So yes, the be caring commandment is certainly one that I've been encouraging people to embrace at the moment.
Yeah, just very relevant now is we're in the midst of supposedly some crisis over fuel supplies. And I just come down from Hull. I was visiting a friend there, and needed to get more petrol for the car. And it was quite a business because a couple of places, big supermarkets, were actually closed. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a problem, and a lot of that is just our own impatience and a lack of care for others. I mean, although it was we were on a family holiday, my wife and I, visiting relatives, and that was all very good, and encouraging people and taking them out for meals and so on and so forth. But we're doing this not as part of the working world. And I was thinking of the people who really needed that fuel for their actual work, and especially thinking about we thought about the Navi mission, one of the foundation pillars of ICF. Just thinking about the HGV drivers and them talking about the difficult and distasteful aspects of their work, the way that they've had to live in their cabs, the way that there's no toilet and there's no bathing facilities, washing facilities, and you get an insight into how people on whose working lives we depend, the sort of work, the sort of life that they have to live. No wonder there's a shortage of HGV drivers. And I certainly have learned a lot more respect just through hearing them talk about the life that they lead.
I think,
sorry.
go on. No, I was going to say, yeah, and I mean, if I say the positive in this at the moment is, I do think with narratives, about everything from CO2 to pickers to lorry drivers to health workers and key workers, I think we have relearned the value of work in the last 18 months. And I think that's, one of the challenges for Reading at Work, for ICF, for other organizations, is to not let people lose sight of what we've learned. Because, really 2 years ago, work was simply the means of economic growth. No one was really interested in what you did, how you did it, who you were, as long as there was an economic output at the other end. And I think we've learned now that actually work itself is more important than the money it makes. And I really, really hope that society doesn't lose sight of that. And I think, a number of the faith and work organizations have a real, I was going to say opportunity, but I would say it's a responsibility to hold that message before society. Sorry, I interrupted you, Anthony.
No, that's fine. No, it's a good point. I'm just going to read, this one is on page 112, and it's in the segment on, or the commandment on, be honest. And maybe that ties in with be caring. The be honest is be honest with ourselves, be honest with the relationship, the dependence that we have on so many other people. So this prayer is taken from the Sermon on the Mount, specifically Matthew chapter 5, verse 37. Jesus recognized how easily the truth can become clouded and laid down a simple challenge: let your yes be yes and your no be no. This stands against many of the narratives that our world seeks to generate. So that's the title there. That's interesting. There's often a shading of the truth. It's yes, but not quite yes, and no, but not quite no. And this is the prayer, which I'll read through. And then, Phil, you might want to comment on this if there's was some occasion for it, or if just in general, the whole commandment of be honest has relevance today. This is the prayer. All-seeing and all-knowing God, life is lived within a web of stories, many defined as much by their purpose as the truth that they claim to convey. The newspaper headline beckoning each passerby with its innuendo and double meaning, demanding attention, even when none is deserved. The bold claims of the advertising poster, convincing us of a strangely familiar promise, generating desire, yet with never enough meaning to be challenged by deeper scrutiny. The spin on the story that chooses its facts carefully and presents them in ways that demean the opponent to convince me that another's cause is justified. This is the world in which we live out our story, one where image can matter more than substance, reputation more than integrity, where narratives can be controlled, perceptions molded, and facts obscured. And then the last keynote: Spirit of truth, amidst the noise of these earthbound narratives, grant me the strength to embrace the liberating clarity of a yes that means yes, and a no that means no. Amen.
Yeah, I think in many respects that particular prayer speaks for itself. And it brings us back to the point you made earlier, Anthony, that, the words of Jesus cut through so much of the society in which we live. One of my sort of strange interests is a thing called Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which we won't go into now, but it's really, essentially it's the recognizing the way we use words to condition one another. So even if I insert the word those in front of a particular group of people, if I grow up hearing, let's say, people from Reading, let's stick with something that's nice and safe, those people from Reading, if I absorb even a word like that, it creates a distance, it creates a label, those, it's not us, it's them. And language is, the famous thing, isn't it? That the pen is mightier than the sword, or these days the Facebook post is mightier than the sword. We have learned how language can be used, abused, and so I just think it's I think the words of Jesus are a wake-up call. And again, we're not going to change that world, but maybe a prayer like that might just nudge us as Christians to say, hang on a minute, before I dive in to condemn or to support, let me just stop and say, what does that really mean? And as Jesus puts it, let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Excellent. Phil, I think it'd be good now to play the reflection video, because we've been thinking a lot about thinking before we speak and thinking before we do. So let's hear this reflection.
God, who calls me to walk in your ways, to embrace the example of Christ and be molded by your Spirit, help me be one who encourages others to do the same. May the words that they use to describe me reflect those that I might choose to speak of you. May the things that I am known for be those that define what it means to be your child. May the trust that others feel able to place in me reflect the faith that holds me fast in you. May the impact of my presence on those around me resemble that which urges me to follow you. This I pray, not through some vain desire for popularity or displaced sense of my own worth, but that you might be represented in those places where it is mine to make you known, in ways that have held me fast in my call to be your disciple. For if these are the things that have sustained my journey, what else could I desire but that others encounter them too? And if through me you choose to make them known, what greater calling could be mine?
Thanks, Phil. I found that reflection very helpful and meaningful. As we move towards ending the webinar, some specific things that I'd like to ask you about. How and by whom would you like to see the Love Workbook used? You've done the book, it's been published, we hope that it's going to be bought and going to be used, but how would you like to see this used? And further to that, is there any specific situation that you would want to draw out, something that motivated a particular prayer that might give us a sort of handle on how you see this book being used?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think primarily, and we very deliberately talked to a couple of people who are, in what we might call non-churchy jobs, and said, what would you be looking for from a book like this? And I think, as I kind of hinted at earlier, my hope is that it's small enough and contemporary enough and unobtrusive enough that you could maybe just have it in your workplace and just dip into it when you're feeling a bit rubbish, really. I think that would be my key way of seeing it used, is just something that, I don't pretend for a minute. I've worked, I worked in a shipyard for 9 years in quite a high pressure job. It is not always easy to hang on to your faith. And I can think of times when it really would have helped me just to take it to the loo, to be honest, and to just sit and read one of those prayers. It maybe is a loo book, really, if you're one of those people that has books there, but maybe a loo book for work. I think the other thing as well what we've tried to do, it doesn't always work this way, but we've tried to break each section up where the opening prayers are quite reflective and quite personal, very, very sort of personal. And then as it kind of drifts through, they become a little bit more open-ended, and very often you'll notice even the language moves from I to we. But actually, I've used quite a few of the prayers that say I in public context, and I've changed the I to a we. So I'd love to see them being used in church. I'd love to see people hearing prayers like this in church, because I think it will communicate to them a relevance in our faith that they need to hear. And as you said, a lot of them did arise from specific situations. And as I was talking a moment ago about the labels we put on people, and the prayer we're going to look at, I think, in a moment, the last one of the videos, is one that really rose out of the refugee crisis, or one of the many refugee crises, and realizing that actually all of this business of refugees and who's in and who's out is all down to the fact that we have created these human-defined boundaries in the world. And so we wrote this prayer coming out of that to just say, well, let's just rethink what it is that creates terms like refugee or asylum seeker or economic migrant, because they themselves say something that maybe we need to challenge. So boundaries came out of that one.
Thanks. We'll listen to that.
God of every nation and source of all life, help us to build our communities on the true foundation of faith in you. Define our boundaries in the light of your all-embracing love, and set our expectations by the measure of your infinite understanding. May we live as citizens of your eternal kingdom, committed to its coming here on earth, embracing its values above our own self-interest, and seeking your presence in every aspect of our life and being.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's very helpful. In that picture of refugees, the most recent email that came to me was talking about the situation in Afghanistan, the internal situation, and just how terrible an Afghan winter can be without adequate heating and home and so on, and the plight of people who are internally displaced in park in central Kabul, and just the tragic future that could be theirs unless help is brought to them. Well, Phil, just as a closing part of our time together, do you have any plans for any other ICF material in book or audio or media format, or where are you going to go with ICF in the coming years or for the next century? We've had 100 years. Where do we go from here? Where would you like to go? Where would you like to take ICF in the years that come, both short term and long term?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, I think we are at, if you like, the third crossroads in ICF's history. And I think, to be fair, we've been very open. I mean, none of us anticipated either COVID or Brexit, really, as we came towards the 100th anniversary. And I think, as trustees, we felt we need to get it to 100, and then we need to be willing to let this go. Perhaps its future is complete now. But I think, given where we are at the moment, I think there is a need for those prophetic narratives into society. And interestingly, we're having some really interesting conversations at the moment with quite a significant trade union about whether we might be able to work alongside them to explore how we can speak and we can speak together into key areas. We're looking at the whole issue of faith again, and how we, I know Dave Law has been quite an active player in looking at issues around faith-friendly workplaces and recognizing the role that faith has. But I think too, we are in that place now where we need to look, where is society heading? As I said a few moments ago, I think work has surprisingly been rediscovered for its own importance. And I think it's early days, but I think a lot of our work is going to be in trying to make sure that that narrative stays alive. And as you've kind of picked up from tonight, we're also looking at maybe trying to develop some of these prayers and resources, maybe into podcasts or into more videos like the ones that you've seen. Because for some people, it won't be about pulling a book out. It might well be about sticking their mobile phone or putting their headphones in and listening to a short podcast for 5 minutes in the morning. So we're very interested in exploring, now we've actually got the text together. How do we get it out there in the multimedia ways that exist in the 21st century?
That's great, Phil. It's been really helpful. I want to just profile the two books again and just say that both of these are available on a special deal. Dave Law is the one who will know more about that, but I think we're offering a really special deal on both books, and we'd just like people to get hold of them, make use of them in their own lives, be encouraged by them. And Phil, we wish you all the best as you take ICF into the future and find new relevances. We know the needs are constant, but find new relevances for the ministry that ICF has had for the last 100 years and beyond, and especially for these issues of love at work and love work, which will always be contemporary and real. So thanks, Phil.
Well, thank you, Anthony. And of course, as you pointed out, wonderful Christmas presents for those people that you never quite know what to buy for. So yeah, we'd love to see everybody who wouldn't want one of those books to open on Christmas morning. So get one for everyone. That would be my advice.
Thank you.